1. We have come to the last 5 verses of the book of Joshua. Some of this passage may well have been added first by Eleazar and then after his death by his son Phinehas. These verses are very factual. We are told, now not by Joshua of course, but another author, that Joshua, soon after challenging the Israelites to serve God and declaring his now famous line, "As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord," died at the age of 110. The text actually calls him the Lord's servant, a title similar to that given to Moses. He was buried in the territory that was given to him as inheritance, namely Timnath-Serah, in the hill country of Ephraim, the land given to his tribe, the tribe of Ephraim, on the north side of Mount Gaash. Verse 31 speaks to the impact of Joshua on Israel. Generally speaking, Israel served the Lord all the days that Joshua lived and was in command. In fact, this obedience to God continued until all the elders of Joshua's time who survived him also died. You will remember that Joshua, like Moses, was most interested in the people and the generations that followed, always to know and remember what God had done for them. So the end of verse 31 tells us that that was indeed the case for that period of time. Now in verse 32, the text tells us of another key event, but not sure whether this occurred prior or just after Joshua's death, although I tend to think the latter myself. Anyway, you may remember that the sons of Israel took the bones of their patriarch Joseph out of Egypt and had brought them to the promised land. So now they bury those bones at Shechem, in the very piece of ground that Joseph's father, Jacob, had bought from the sons of Hamor, the father of Shechem, for 100 pieces of, quote, money. Robert Jameson talks of this as being 100 pieces of silver, calls it kistata, as it's translated from the Hebrew, meaning a piece of silver, which is supposed to also mean a lamb, the weights being in the form of lambs or kids, which were in all probability the earliest standard of value among pastoral people. The tomb that now covers the spot is some sort of Mohammedan structure, but there is no reason to doubt that the precious deposit of Joseph's remains may be concealed there at the present time. The land became the inheritance of Joseph's sons. However, why this is mentioned here was indeed surprising to some commentators and to us to a certain extent. Robert Jameson, however, suggests that the proper burial of these bones had indeed to wait until the tribe of Ephraim had obtained their settlement. And as you remember, that happened late in the process. Or until this solemn convocation described in this chapter actually had taken place. David Gusick adds his view. He says, this may seem like an inconsequential point, but it fulfills Genesis 50, verse 25. And he adds, God likes to tie up loose ends. And so he did here. This is also mentioned in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 22, as an example of Joseph's faith. Indeed, it is. The last verse of the book tells us that Eleazar, the high priest, whose father was Aaron and his uncle was Moses, also died. They buried him at Gibeath, also in Ephraim, land belonging to Phinehas his son, as it was given to him as part of his inheritance. Again, Jameson adds this information. The sepulchre is at the modern village of Awarta, south of Shechem, which according to Jewish travelers contains the graves also of Ithamar, the brother of Phinehas, the son of Eleazar. Matthew Henry adds that Eleazar, the chief priest, probably died about the same time that Joshua died, as Aaron had died in the same year as Moses had died. Now, here, Phinehas was high priest. Henry, in introducing this last passage of Joshua, writes these words: "This book, which began with triumphs, here ends with funerals, by which all the glory of man is stained." End of quote. And I think this is the key and only lesson for us here as well. Eventually, we all die. The issue is, how have we lived, first and foremost before our God, and secondly, before those that we were allowed to cross paths with? What will be the legacy that we're leaving behind? Certainly Joshua, as did Noah, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, and Moses before him, left a legacy that God was pleased with. Now it's your turn and my turn. It doesn't have to be a famous legacy. Remember, we're serving just one. I hope you've enjoyed living through the book of Joshua with me, trying to get a handle of how God was settling his people into the promised land. It was a journey of conquest, strength, obedience, failure sometime, and lots of faith. It linked for us the history of the Jewish people in Egypt to the times when the so-called judges ruled them. It's been a pleasure having you along. Next time, we'll consider some introductory thoughts on the book of Judges. The stories in it are sometimes even harder to understand or accept, and often more gruesome. But they're in the Word of God, and we're going to do our best to study them. Join us, won't you? Subscribe to our YouTube channel so you won't miss a single issue or episode. Comment on what we have to say. Ask us questions. Disagree with us. Just love to hear from you. Share these with others that you love and know. And above all, keep studying the Word of God on your own. Again, we'll see you next time.